Hello, everybody. Welcome to this presentation of the American Topical Association. Our presenter today is Wayne Youngblood, who is a well-known writer and philatelist and several other things, and a great friend of the association. His presentation today is The Most Pernicious of Album Weeds, Modern Postal Counterfeits, which is a subject I find both interesting and terrifying. So with that note, Wayne, I will turn it over to you.
Alrighty, thank you, Eric. Thank you guys for having me this evening. Many have noticed as people were coming in, many of you know me already and know that I've been kind of obsessing on the postal counterfeit problem for a number of years. I've always been interested in postal counterfeits, and until recently, they were kind of an odd and unusual thing, which is kind of what I follow. But they have become, as I now say, the most pernicious of album weeds, and we'll go into what is an album weed momentarily. But about 2016 or so, we began to notice more counterfeits showing up. It used to be most counterfeits in the past have been parts of larger crimes. So they've been part of counterfeiting crimes, in other cases, child pornography. I mean, but they've rarely ever been a crime unto themselves, simply because in the United States, at least, of course, it's a huge felony to counterfeit stamps. And the combination between the potential for the being arrested and serving jail time, as well as the fact that counterfeiting prime rate or first class postage stamps just has not been profitable enough. It never really was much of an issue. But again, a few years ago, we began noticing an uptick in the appearance of these things. And in 2019 was the last time I kept in contact with the Postal Service quite a bit over this, what I saw as an emerging problem. And in 2019 was the last time that they actually gave me a dollar amount that I could go with. Now, keep this in mind, as 2019 was just on the cusp of when the counterfeit problem just exploded. And at that point, they were telling me they were losing about $1 billion per year in revenue on counterfeiting. Now, since then, we've now seen virtually every single stamp that's been issued since 2018 and some earlier counterfeited and being sold at huge discounts. So if 2019 they were losing $1 billion a year, I would be extremely on the low side by calling it more than $3 billion a year in losses. It's becoming a huge problem, and unfortunately, and of course, it stretches way beyond our hobby. There are, if you're online at all, you've no doubt seen ads on Facebook. You've seen them probably on Amazon and some on eBay, although they've cleaned that up a bit, offering all these discounted postage stamps. Well, I always tell people, particularly with forever stamps, because they're always good for the first class rate. If you're seeing a huge discount, and I mean more than 15 to 20% tops off of the face value, they have to be either stolen or counterfeit, and 99% of the time that they are counterfeit, and they're counterfeits specifically from China. That is the entire production at this point. Initially, when I was writing about these things, several people accused me of being jingoistic. But as more and more information came to light, there are no counterfeits being produced anywhere else to the best of anyone's knowledge. They are entirely Chinese. They are either state sanctioned or at the very least state tolerated. My guess is they don't mind because they're probably trying to mess with our economy a bit. This is one way that they see that. So with that, unless there's any questions right now, we'll jump into the actual slideshow part, which is probably more interesting. Can everybody see the screen okay? Okay, good. So as I call it, and by the way, this is particularly ironic or interesting that we're doing this today. This is May 6th, which I call Penny Black Day. May 6th was the date that penny black was released in 1840. So with this wonderful, wonderful invention we had to begin with, and now we're dealing with all these counterfeits. So we'll start out really quickly, and I'll kind of go through these quickly unless anyone has questions. I use the term album weeds a lot. And what is an album weed? Well, it's considered to be a fake forgery or counterfeit. We've expanded that to include bogus issues, illegals, or fantasies. The term itself was popularized by a fellow by the name of Reverend R.B. Erie, and he coined the phrase during the late 19th century when all kinds of fake items were showing up in the market. And at this point, there weren't all that many terrifically rare or costly stamps, but they were showing up as much as anything to help fill album spaces. And of course, anytime someone can help relieve you of the burden of your money, they're happy to do so. In 1906, Erie produced an 8-volume work on by the name of Album Weeds, entirely on fakes and forgeries. And this is, again, based on articles that had been running since 1871. This is still an essential reference for those who follow historic fakes, forgeries, and counterfeits. So fakes themselves, of the three, and you can see the text here, but of the three primary and commonly used terms, fakes, forgeries, and counterfeits, fakes are probably the least desirable other than from a reference standpoint. This is because fake stamps are almost always genuine in some form, but with alterations to make them appear to be more valuable. Now, this is what makes them the least desirable of all these album weeds that we'll be talking about, because their entire purpose is to relieve you of your money. So that can include anything from reperforation jobs, chemically removing colors. In this case, the Shanghai China overprint is a complete fake, or this beautiful 4-margin number 2, which the basic stamp is genuine, has been completely rebacked, and bits of the design have been drawn in and such. So this gives you an idea for the fakery that goes on. And again, this is entirely to steal your money. Here's more of them. That now the ones up on the top here are kind of interesting. You see the mini stamps in the center. These were not necessarily created to steal from anyone, but what they were is this was a bunch of bored farmers back in the 1930s. What happened, what they discovered, and who knows who discovered it, is that if you dip postage stamps or currency into anhydrous ammonia, which is used to fertilize fields, it will shrink the paper to about 3/4 of its original size. So you have all these mini stamps and sometimes mini currency. Here's a fake overprint on a Philippine stamp and a fake counterfeit as well from Manila. World's Columbian Exposition. Here's a great RPO cancellation on a 2-cent Columbian cover. Problem is it's fake. It was created by a photocopier, as was the World's Fair station canceled here. I mean, there's, again, the mind is very, very creative when there's a chance of making money at someone else's expense. A set of Chinese stamps here. This is, about a $700 set or so. The one really scarce one is the 8 denominated one here. But what happens is one can fake the tablet of the 8, use the actual stamp from the 52 denomination, and then just paste the 8 over it. And if done well, it's very difficult to detect. In this case, it showed up in a major auction firm several years ago. Again, here's a nice imperf of the E stamp. This is one of the reasons why imperforate errors you usually want to collect in pairs. You can see on the right, the booklet stamp has huge margins all around. Well, by removing the perforations, you can have a fake imperf single that looks a lot like an imperf stamp. The fire pumper, that's a very scarce number. Somebody simply grafted the number on from a used stamp onto the mint strip to make it an $800 strip. Similarly, the pre-cancel lines on the 20-cent flag stamp, which is about a $60 strip if it's genuine. Somebody very neatly drew the pre-cancel lines in with a felt tip pen. So that's a taste of some of the fakes that are out there. Now, forgeries, a forgery is an unmarked and usually unmarked reproduction or fabrication of some real stamp. And again, almost always a scarce stamp. And I say almost always because we'll talk about packet forgeries in a moment. And these are intended entirely to fool collectors. And as I say, the intent can either be benign or sinister. Now, during the early 20th century and well into the 1940s, H.E. Harrison, particularly when Captain Tim, that's another wonderful program, uh, and stamp collecting was just exploding in popularity. The suppliers of these stamps couldn't keep up. So if you didn't have common stamps of, say, Columbia, well, we'll just print them up. And so there are tons and tons of forgeries of stamps from the late 1890s on into the 1940s of really common stamps that were forged specifically to fill spaces. The stamp suppliers couldn't find enough real ones, and so they printed their own. And that's why these are called packet forgeries. Now, and again, in many of the listings in Scott and other catalogs for these stamps, bases the value on the forgery rather than a genuine stamp, because the genuine stamp is even if it's somewhat common, still much scarcer than the forgery. Now, some forgeries can be very, very highly collectible. Now, some of them, done by the masters, as I call them, such as Sperati over here on the left, in some cases can actually sell for more than the genuine postage stamp. So these have become classics in their own right. Here's a wonderful Zeppelin cover from the Chicago flight. You've got all the markings, nice airmail envelope. It's addressed here. It's the return address is from Seeger, who is a well-known airmail specialist. Century Progress cancel. The problem with this is, other than the 6-cent stamped envelope itself, everything else is a complete fabrication. And this was again, to duplicate a cover that normally would sell for about $1,000. But someone took a bit of time and effort to try to, again, relieve someone else of the burden of their money. Early facsimiles. Now, these were actually engraved facsimiles of the newspaper stamps, but and you can see the word facsimile was worked into the design, or falsch down here. This was an important thing, but again, those who are, shall we say, ethically challenged will often put fake cancellations over them that will cover the word facsimile or false and make it look like a heavily canceled legitimate stamp. And that happens frequently. Or in the case of down here at the bottom, which is one of my favorites, the left-hand stamp from the Bucks Confederate. Now, first of all, I will make the point that there never was a Bucks Confederate Richmond Express service. So there never was a legitimate stamp of its own. But the one on the left here appeared in the late 1870s or so. And because of the collecting of provisionals and Confederate material was so popular at the time, that soon forgeries of the bogus stamp that never was legitimate to begin with began showing up on the market. So now you can have multiple varieties of faked and forged stamps that never existed. So with that, that's a brief introduction to what some of the types of album weeds that you might encounter are. I'll pause this for a moment before we go forward to see if there are any questions. Jennifer? And you're muted.
Not yet.
Okay,
not yet.
So now we're going to move into the modern U.S. postal counterfeits. And this is, and I will say, although U.S. counterfeits are probably the most, there are more U.S. postal counterfeits in the last 6 years than there are of any other country. China is also counterfeiting the stamps of Canada, Great Britain, Germany, Australia, and others. So we're not the only ones with this problem. In Great Britain, we'll get more into this in a little bit, but Great Britain actually went to an entirely different system to try to fight counterfeiting. So postal counterfeits, and I'll read through this quickly. I'm sure you can read too, but a postal counterfeit is simply a fabricated copy of a real stamp. It's created very specifically to defraud a postal administration of postage revenue until recently. Now, again, these are not aimed at collectors. These are aimed at defrauding the postal services of various countries. Now, until recently, these were identified really rather easily because they had a very crude appearance compared to a genuine stamp. But the recent advances in technology, as well as, for the lack of a better term, the cheapening of quality of our own stamps has made it much, much easier for stamps to be counterfeited. And their products, and we'll see this in a moment, their products are becoming more and more convincing all the time. Now, postally used counterfeits, or those still on cover, usually sell for many times the price of those collected as unused examples, because again, it's a felony to knowingly buy or use counterfeit postage stamps. So, their uses have again historically been very scarce. There's a lot of it happening now simply because people don't know they're using counterfeits, but they're still much, much scarcer than the unused ones. Scott was listing them for a while, and then once everything became too voluminous, I guess is the best word for this, then they stopped listing any of the forever stamps. Now they still have the specialized, the older postal counterfeits and such. But the forever stamps have been spun off into their own volume, so you can actually get a specialized catalog of United States counterfeit stamps. And they produce that once every couple of years ago. These are examples of some of the older postal counterfeits, and you can see in each case the genuine stamp is on the left and the counterfeit is on the right. And even though in each case they got the color fairly close, you can see the fine engraving on the Jefferson stamp, the Eisenhower stamp, and even on the airmail stamp. That loss of detail in the counterfeits is noticeable at a glance. And again, this is the difference between a line engraved stamp, which is what the originals were, and an offset lithography produced stamp, which is the counterfeits. There have never been yet, and I suspect there probably never will be, a successful line engraved postal counterfeit stamp. And again, until recently, these were very easy to pick out. This is one of my favorites. This is the 50-cent Lucy Stone stamp, and you might have seen the chart behind me in the back. But some years ago, I was working with the Postal Service on one of their cases, and they presented me with this large chart afterwards. You can see down at the bottom of this is a partial sheet of the 50-cent Lucy Stone counterfeit. Now, this is all messy, and what it is it's a make-ready piece. If anyone knows printing trade, this is as you're setting up the press and setting up the plates and everything, you pull a proof periodically, take a look at it, check the impression and all this kind of stuff, make sure it's right. Well, counterfeiters are no different. They want high quality work too, obviously. So this is one of those sheets. Now, when the feds busted in and arrested all these guys for counterfeiting these stamps, the sheet down at the bottom was one of the things that they seized as evidence. Now, blown up, apparently one of the pressmen had picked up the sheet, the ink was still wet, got on his thumb, went on to the margin of the stamp, and down here at the bottom you can see the circled part, and left a perfect impression of the Lucy Stone stamp, only with his fingerprint. So after they nabbed him, and here's his fingerprint on the left, makes it a little bit hard to say it wasn't me doing that. So they had him kind of dead to rights on this one. So here's a nice bundle of all kinds of U.S. stamps. You can see the bonsai stamps. And again, so many of these have very high topical appeal. Fruits and vegetables, Chinese New Year, flag, frogs, flowers, all this kind of stuff. There's not a single one of them on this spread that's genuine. These are all postal counterfeits. Similarly, all these are as well. Here's the high values up here. There's again Black Heritage. There's the Life Magnified, Winter Woodland, even semi-postals. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but she might have something to say about this if she were still alive. These are all postal counterfeits. Again, here we go. Here's a more recent batch. Here's the pinbacks, the thank you, Alex Trebek, the coral postcard stamps, Hank Aaron, Ansel Adams, Dungeons and Dragons. Every one of these is a counterfeit. As I mentioned, every single stamp, virtually every single stamp, not quite, but virtually every single stamp since about 2018 has been extensively counterfeited. And in some cases, particularly with the flag coil stamps, they've been reprinted over and over so that there may be as many as 45 different collectible types of one single stamp. Now, this is less the case with the sheet stamps as it is with the definitives like flag stamps, but we're now finding collectible varieties of many different counterfeits. But it's not just stamps. And this is another, and I won't go into this in much detail, but someone recently contacted me about this. The Postal Service is now also having a huge problem with counterfeit package labels. Now, these are the things where you print out the code and you get a unique number and unique code up here, and you click and ship service. These are being counterfeited as well. The problem is that they will scan normally through. You can see the lines through the barcodes here, which means it's been delivered successfully. And in this case, these came to me, and I was kidding with my postmaster saying, what if these were counterfeit? And I came home and I typed in the tracking number. And if you type in the tracking number, it'll come up as counterfeit postage. And this is currently the only way for the Postal Service to detect these, because again, they go right through all the mechanized equipment and everything just fine. But unless someone actually takes the time to type in the tracking number, it goes right through. And they estimate they're losing, and there are actually several post offices, including the Tucson and Phoenix post offices, are focusing much, much more on this type of fraud than they are on the counterfeit stamps. Now, in some cases, the packaging leaves nothing to doubt. Here's U.S. flag stamps in this little thing, made in China. How about that? Social media is loaded with ads, and I'll flip through some of these fairly quickly. Here's a Black Friday sale. Our own post office, my postmaster tells me that she regularly gets people coming in asking for the internet deal. And she tells them that no, there is no such thing. Postal Service does not discount its stamps. These are counterfeit stamps from China. And some of them are embarrassed, and some of them say, oh, well, I'll just order them online. And to which she responds, she says, that's okay. I know who you are, where you live, and I'll tell Wayne Youngblood.
Wayne?
Yes.
I have a question for you. On the package that was sent, and you said they were counterfeit labels.
Mm-hmm.
The person that they were sent from, does that person then get reported? And do they know that it was a problem? How does that work? Do you report the person that sent it? And
I do.
okay.
And that's the only way they'll get reported, is if the recipient happens to notice that it's a counterfeit label and reports them. And my guess is, I don't know that individual, but my guess is that person had to have known what they were doing. I mean, this is a little bit more intentional. One can be slightly passive and use counterfeit stamps somewhat unknowingly, but to create a package label, a counterfeit package label, is a little bit more intent there, I think.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was
Yeah. So other ads here too, and again, so many of these sites mimic the Postal Service and a lot of the features on it. But one of the things I found interesting about this, and you can see the arrow, it says someone and somewhere purchased. And what this is if you've been on a lot of shopping sites, a lot of times when you're there, part of the pressuring of trying to get you to buy something is it'll say, Susie from Phoenix just bought this or whatever. So, but they had this as a stationary thing. Someone and somewhere purchased this. Well, we know that. This is one of my favorites here. This is actually when I clicked into one of the sites and I read the initial part. It says, Nady Chris lying in clinic, the pregnancy care center. And it's shown here as being in Nazhuang New Village, Xinjiang community in Shenzhen, China. And it says, we were originally a company engaged in e-commerce. Daily express parcel delivery requires a large number of stamps. Unfortunately, our company has been affected by the epidemic last year and has not been profitable, so we decided to sell these stamps. So why would a company, a pregnancy company in China, be using United States stamps to begin with? But apparently it worked for some. This is another one of my favorites. Here's another one here. Look at the spelling of the promo special here. That's a highly believable thing, no doubt. But some of the ads are really fairly convincing. In this case, somebody took a picture of a pegboard with packages of presumably U.S. genuine stamps, but with the price tags on them for $27.50. This one really got me. I found this a few months ago. Now, first of all, you got to see forver stamps, not forever stamps. These are forver stamps, so it's not quite the same thing. But among other things, says American Philatelic Association offers new member benefits, including discount counterfeit postage, apparently. But anyways, here's more U.S. flag forver stamps. I don't need to go to the post office and standing in line and so on. But they'll make all kinds of claims. So getting into identifying counterfeits, there aren't, people regularly when I speak on this, either to stamp clubs, non-collectors, or online, people ask, well, how do you identify a counterfeit stamp? And unfortunately, there is no universal characteristic to identify. But there are characteristics that a number of them share. So this is an important slide here. Now, for any counterfeits that were produced earlier than mid-2022, there is no phosphorescent tagging. If you have access to a shortwave ultraviolet light, you can see the phosphorescent tagging that's placed on postage stamps. So any produced before mid-2022 are untagged. All counterfeits since then are tagged, which makes it much more difficult for the Postal Service to identify because it sails right through all the automated equipment. But as collectors, one of the things that we see is almost all of them are tagged much, much more brightly than the genuine stamps. And we'll see this shortly. They're frequently printed on slightly thicker paper stock than genuine stamps, so you can do a flick test and pretty well determine them. They're also frequently printed on glossier paper stock than genuine stamps. And usually because the Postal Service no longer distributes high resolution images of any stamp anywhere. I mean, as a philatelic journalist, this was a problem, but because they do not do that, the counterfeiters actually have to get genuine postage stamps to scan in before they can create the printing plates for the counterfeits. And so as a result of that, usually the printing of counterfeit stamps is slightly grainier looking under magnification than that of genuine stamps. And I say usually because they're getting so much better that in a few cases the counterfeits almost look better than the real thing. But most of the time, that's a good basis. They also have a peculiar scent. It's not something that everyone can identify, but once you've smelled it, you can't unsmell it. And I say this somewhat jokingly, but not really. So I, people bring me stamps. If I don't have my equipment to look for, first thing I do is I start sniffing them. And you're wondering, why are you sniffing your stamps? Well, I want to find counterfeits. It's not exactly like a dog sniffing it out, but it's close. But it's a slightly sweet plastic smell is the only thing I can say. But it's a very identifiable scent if it's something that you can pick up. Okay, so we'll look at a few. Any other questions yet, Jennifer?
Yeah, another question about the label. So how do you report that? The false, if you enter that tracking number and it comes up that it's counterfeit, how do you report that? And then what does the USPS do about that report?
Well, we've just extended the talk by about 45 minutes.
Oh.
No, reporting it, if you have, and not everybody has for lack of a better term, a good postmaster. If you have a good postmaster who's concerned about these things, you can start the reporting process right there. All you have to do is show the evidence and let them know, and they'll take it from there and move it up the line. The Postal Inspection Service also has a place on its website where you can report counterfeit stamps, or in this case, counterfeit labels. The problem is they're kind of inundated by reports. And so first of all, they'll never get back to you. And that's just because there's so much going on. But secondarily, they often cannot, unless it's something that you can prove is of significant volume, it's not, for two $10 parcels, it's not really worth their time to send a whole bunch of people out to try to bust these guys. So realistically, probably nothing is going to happen, but nothing's going to happen if we don't report it either. So the best thing is if you have a cooperative postmaster who will take the report, because chances are good they have the ears of the Postal Inspection Service better than us. Now, the Postal Inspection Service, and I know this question will come up, why is the Postal Service doing anything about this problem if it's so big? And it's a twofold problem. One is the Postal Service, the part of the Postal Service that designs and prints stamps is completely separate from the Postal Inspection Service, which is the law enforcement arm of the Postal Service. And until or unless they get together and compare notes and the design people realize, hey, we've got to do something more than just print a bunch of pretty stickers, nothing's going to change in the printing. They're going to have to incorporate ways that counterfeits can be detected if anything's going to be done. But the Postal Inspection Service, they care very deeply about it. But the problem is there are about 1,500 postal inspectors in the entire United States. Now, that may sound like a lot, but given the scope of everything else that goes on, they're stretched very thin. And of course, I regularly remind people that the postal inspectors are quite busy dealing with child trafficking and fentanyl, the spread of fentanyl. And so when you compare those things with counterfeit stamps kind of goes into third place. So it's a complex thing. Okay.
I did have one sort of related to that question to that. They asked, so if the USPS used line engraving instead of offset printing, would that make it easier to detect the counterfeits and possibly deter this?
In a word, yes. Now, there's several problems with this. One is one of the things that, without going into the whole history of the feud between the Postal Service and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, but one of the things that the Postal Service has been kind of plagued with for a number of years, and in part this is because of its, it receives no tax dollars, so it's always been mandated to come as close to breaking even as possible. So one of the downside, or one of the big downsides of that is it has always looked very, very closely at cost of printing. So, for example, when Postal Service was still working with the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, they looked at cost per thousand of stamps. And at that time, the cost per thousand printing stamps was somewhere around $4.25 or something like this. It cost $4.25 to print 1,000 stamps. And so when the private printers came in, American Banknote Company, Senate, and some of the others, they started undercutting these bids. And so they get it down to, well, we can do it for $3.92 per thousand. And again, given the number of billions of stamps that the Postal Service prints, those quotes make a difference. So they just went entirely low bid. And of course, low bids don't include anything like line engraving, because line engraving is a very expensive form of printing. But I maintain that if the Postal Service actually stopped and thought about it for a minute, if they produced fewer stamps per year, different stamps per year, did them by line engraving, their cost per thousand would go way up. That's quite true. But when you consider they're losing well over $3 billion per year to counterfeiting, that kind of more than offsets the increased cost of stamp production. But unfortunately, nobody has looked at that aspect yet. So we'll go through identifying a few counterfeits real quick here. In this case, the genuine stamps are on the top, the counterfeits are on the bottom. This is the Global Forever Chrysanthemum. As you can see, the microprinting is not great, but it's here, and you can see USPS. And the printing, if you look at the rosettes of the dot screen, they're smoother and a little bit more detailed. Whereas when you look at the counterfeit on the bottom here, you can see, first of all, the microprinting is just trashed. But secondarily, the dot screen is much more crude. You can see that easily. Now, unfortunately, though, to the casual observer, the stamp on the top doesn't look really much different than the stamp on the bottom. You've got to really look closely to see that. But again, under magnification, there's no question. This is one of the worst ones, but I show it nonetheless. These are one of the Spring Flowers booklets. Genuine's on the left and the counterfeits on the right. Gee, there's no comparison to the printing quality on that one. But that's kind of become the exception to the rule. Another Global Forever. In this case, the genuine is the one on the bottom, the poinsettia, and the counterfeits on the top. Again, now you can see they're getting the USPS and microprinting a little bit better, but it's still illegible compared to the genuine. And again, the rosettes and the printing, the dot pattern is much more crude on the counterfeit. But again, this was 2018, so you figure they've kind of refined their printing since then. Again, some of the early high values, you can see, the microprinting USPS is crude over here. Again, you've got a finer dot screen, more crude. Same thing here. You can clearly see the USPS here, not so much here. And you've got, again, the very serious difference between printing quality. Now, tagging used to be a fail-safe, as I mentioned before midnight 2022. There were no postal counterfeits that had phosphorescent tagging. You can see here one of the early versions of the counterfeited high values are untagged, but suddenly in mid-2022, they were printed again, and this time they were phosphor tagged. So now this is makes them that much more difficult to detect. So one of the ones that I documented the first time it came through, this is postmarked May 12th, 2022. That's a very rare inverted postmark from my town, very exact. But what you see here is this is the upper left stamp is the original postal counterfeit, and you can see in the ultraviolet photograph down here, it was completely untagged. The genuine stamp is the bottom one. And then the new counterfeit that showed up with the tagging the day before that is tagged, and it's much more brightly tagged than the genuine you can see here. And again, the printing quality is, in this case, they've now perfected the microprinting. USPS is much clearer on both of the counterfeits than it is on the genuine stamp. But if you look at the dot screen, again, the dot screen is much finer and smoother on the genuine and much cruder and coarse on the counterfeits. So now we have a tagged and untagged versions of the counterfeits as well as the genuine. This is when we really began working into numbers of different collectible varieties of counterfeits. Even the counterfeiters themselves started advertising, look, our stamps are tagged. And all they did is they lined up photographs of their old stamps versus their new ones to prove that they now had genuine stamps. This Forever stamp is one that has gone through several iterations. The genuine stamp is the single here that's slightly darker. Again, originally it was untagged, and it was actually printed in this case with a form of a raised kind of a thermographic ink, whereas both of these versions were done with offset printing. And again, these are very easy to visually separate if you've got the genuine on hand. But again, you can see the tagging differences make quite a visual difference. Here's the 2022 Love stamp, and again, if you look at them just quickly, you don't see much of a difference, but under magnification, there's no question. You've got the genuine at the left and the counterfeit at the right. Again, much coarser, much cruder appearance under magnification.
Wayne,
Yes.
when you're comparing the genuine and the counterfeit, what degree of magnification is required? Is a question.
You can see it with as little as a 10 power magnifier, which, if you have, or even actually if it's like an illuminated 5 power one of the little flipla, most any level of magnification will allow you to see that. Obviously, 15 to 20 power is great, but even an illuminated 5 power or just a 10 power will give you all the information you probably need. Here's the Title IX stamp. I'm sorry. Okay. Title IX stamp. Now, in this case, this is one of the odd cases where, in my opinion, the counterfeit looks almost better than the real thing. The real one's on the left here, and you can see it has a finer dot screen, but it looks kind of fuzzy and such, and the counterfeit's on the right, but the contrast is nicer. And if you look at the stamp, first of all, if you look at the stamp, you can't really tell the difference, but in some ways, I think they almost produce this stamp better than the original. Now, other stamps are a little bit easier. Now, this Forever stamp, the Love stamp, you can see the counterfeit is a much darker red than the issued one. The paper stock that was used, if you turn it over and use ultraviolet light, you can see it's much, much more fluorescent. It glows much brighter under ultraviolet light than the genuine. And then under ultraviolet light, you can see the tagging difference as well. So again, there's almost no counterfeit that you can't tell the difference if you take the time to examine it. But of course, the Postal Service can't do that. But we as collectors can, if you're wanting to avoid, first of all, if you're wanting to avoid getting counterfeits in your own collection, it's best to either buy them when they come out from the Postal Service or buy them from a dealer that you truly trust and will actually look for counterfeits. There are some dealers who don't, but if you know your dealer and have a relationship with them and know that they've got your back on that is an important thing. Here's the Ansel Adams stamp. In this case, you can see the counterfeits on the left and the genuines on the right. It's a very dark stamp to begin with, but you can see, again, much coarser and cruder on the counterfeit than it is on the genuine. Here's one of my favorites. Here's the Dungeons and Dragons. You've got the counterfeits on the left, genuines on the right, and they all get kind of fuzzy under a certain amount of magnification. But what I really love about the skulls on the counterfeits is their eyes just glow. And this is under normal light, just magnification, but boy, they really stand out. But there's other details. But again, this rosette pattern, because it's almost like a moire pattern when you under other photographic circumstances, when you photograph a genuine stamp that's created with a dot pattern to create with a dot pattern with lithography, you're going to get these crude rosettes. But man, look at those eyes. I just love those eyes. Here's the postcard rate coral stamps. These are the sheet version. Genuine ones are at the top. The counterfeits are on the bottom. I didn't bother to magnify these too much, but you can see some differences. I'm sorry I don't have them lined up exactly, but you can see some differences in the printing on them just under normal light. But under ultraviolet light, again, the tagging on the counterfeits is much brighter than on the genuine. And then the fluorescence of the paper is a much brighter degree of fluorescence. Here's our brand new high values, and again, partly it's because the space photography is very abstract in and of itself as a design. But also the fact that it's printed by offset lithography, again, a very cheap form of printing. The counterfeit is the larger image. The inset is the genuine stamp, and you can see in this case the micro printing is actually better on the counterfeit than it is on the genuine stamp, and the resolution. If you look for the dot screen, don't worry about the color because I photographed them under different light sources, so the color is the same on them when you examine them. But if you try to look at the dot screen, it's virtually the same on both of them. The die cutting is proper. Again, the only real thing is the microprinting is much better on the counterfeits, and the tagging is much brighter than it is on the genuine stamps. But man, these are some of their best yet. But they also make mistakes, and they've had some doozies, and some of these are just kind of fun to look at. So here's the this is one of the floral booklets. I don't know if you recognize it offhand here, but this is a hydrangea, I believe. But here's the genuine with the USPS microprinting just off the stem of the flower. Well, they reversed it. So rather than facing in, the microprinting faces out on the counterfeit. Again, given this is a small detail that you really have to look for, but you don't have to look so hard. Here's counterfeits of the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 cent fruit stamps. And of these, the 1 cent, 2 cent, and 3 cent stamps shown here on the left, those exist only as coil stamps. They were never produced as sheet stamps. So you know already that those are counterfeits. But again, all the other things we've discussed come through as well. But the other thing that I can't figure out is that, you know, when you see these ads, if you've ever seen these ads, they advertise things at a straight price. It doesn't matter if you're buying a global forever stamp, which is what, $1.55 now or whatever, really, or a 73-cent forever stamp. They still are going to cost you $29 per 100 or whatever. Well, that's the same with these 1 cent through 5 cent stamps. Why would you pay $29 for 105 cent stamps? That's a face value of $5. So, I mean, they were offering these, and my guess is these are going to be probably among the scarcest of the counterfeits in the future, because nobody's going to pay multiples over face value for counterfeited stamps. And I don't know if
wondering about those.
Exactly. Yeah, I still haven't figured out why they did those, unless they were just practicing and decided to release them. But
See them on junk mail a lot.
yeah, but I've never seen the counterfeits show up on junk mail. But these were created almost, well, they're also meant to be makeup stamps, but their primary use is on junk mail. One of my other favorites is the Buzz Lightyear stamp. Now, you've got the whole sheet of some of the different ones here, but on the counterfeits, or at least up until recently, the stamp in the lower right corner is missing this USA Forever inscription. And that was one way that I could see on eBay or anywhere else when somebody was offering fake Buzz Lightyear stamps, is because it was always missing that inscription on the lower right stamp. Now, earlier this year, they went back to press with this, and now there's corrected counterfeit stamps. But if you ever see one with the rare missing inscription, you know it has to be counterfeit. The love stamp is my favorite. Now, this 44-cent love stamp, and who knows why they went back and counterfeited again an older stamp. This is the genuine in the middle, and you know the size is about the size of some of the other floral booklets and stuff. The counterfeit stamps is the larger image in the background, but you don't have to bother to look at the tagging or the perforation measurements or anything else, because this is the actual size of the two stamps. They somehow managed to print the counterfeits, you know, what, good 1.5 times the size of the original. They're huge, and so that's a very simple way to tell that one apart. But they're also going back and doing older issues now. And again, I'm puzzled by this as well. These are counterfeits of the 34-cent Statue of Liberty and the 22-cent Uncle Sam. And you can see, again, you can still see this is a poorly printed, even the good one's poorly printed. But the counterfeit's even much more poorly printed. But why would you be counterfeiting 34 and 22-cent stamps? It's the same as the low values. I'm still trying to get answers to this, but I so far have not been able to do so. So what do we do? Well, I like the Brits solution. Now, the Brits originally went to simply, essentially devaluing their old stamps and printing new ones with the codes on them. But it only took a matter of a few months for the counterfeiters to start producing stamps with the codes on them as well. So that was a non-starter. But what they are doing now, and I'll show a couple of slides here, here it is, addressed to this person. It was identified as counterfeit stamp, and they're charging the recipient £2.50 to receive this as unpaid postage, and it's obviously a penalty too. In this case, they charged £5 for this, and again, it was identified as counterfeit postage. And I like this because if you are going down to your local bodega and buying a handful of stamps that you don't know are counterfeit, and you throw them on a birthday card to Aunt Mary, and suddenly Aunt Mary gets fined $10 for receiving that birthday card, that you're going to hear from her. And there's a definite disincentive to use these things again. And so having a slight penalty for receiving something with counterfeit stamps, I think would help serve as a deterrent to those who are unknowingly using. Obviously, those who knowingly use counterfeit stamps, yeah, it's not going to matter. But I think this is certainly one approach that's worth thinking about. I also mentioned earlier that a lot of counterfeits are produced on a much glossier paper. The counterfeit is on the right here. This is the Osiris Rex, and the Gen was on the left. And I had to take this at an angle to get that glossy factor, but they're much, much glossier in many cases. So with that, that's the end of this part of the program. We can, if we have time, anybody wants, we can go back in here and we can talk about some of the other types of album weeds, but I think this is a good place to pretty well wind up. Hopefully there are some questions.
I do have a couple of questions for you. One of them is, how do the counterfeiters do with special effects? Metallic inks, spot gloss, the lenticular stamps, embossing, etc.
Okay, that's a very good question. That's something I actually should have mentioned before. So some of these special effects, the foil stamping, the lenticular, like the spot gloss, any of those things, those are off-the-shelf technologies that anybody can buy for printing. And so that in that sense, it's very easy for them to duplicate. It's some of the types of security devices they use on currency, for example, are much, much more difficult. But these are all off-the-shelf technologies, and so they're not hard to duplicate at all.
Okay. I have another question. With all of these sellers of counterfeit stamps, are the Chinese wholesaling inexpensive counterfeits to very naive sellers, or do the people selling counterfeits generally know that they are selling them?
Another really good question. It's a mix. Now, most of the counterfeits that are coming in very large shipments, and a lot of them are going to Chinese agents that are here in the States. And those are the ones setting up the websites and selling them. Now, they will wholesale them, depending on whatever quantity you want to buy. They'll wholesale them to anyone who wants to buy them and distribute them. So it's a combination of both. But the other thing that we see happening a lot too is once you get, there's often 3 or 4 steps of the selling here. There's the large shipment that comes in. There's the Chinese agent that then sells to another wholesaler. That wholesaler may still wholesale them somewhat to somebody else, and then somebody buys them at somewhat of a retail, although reduced price, and then they get distributed to the end users. But what happens, unfortunately, a lot is, bodegas and small convenience stores in large cities, they sell postage stamps as a convenience to their customers. And a lot of these people either don't know or don't care that they're buying counterfeit stamps. And so they're selling counterfeit stamps over the counter that they purchased from one of these people. But anyway, the distribution is at many different levels. In some cases, small shipments have been shipped directly from China, but that's been the exception to the rule, and that's almost certainly going to end under the elimination of the de minimis shipments, because those will now be picked up because they're checked much more closely. But I believe the large shipments will still come.
Okay. Ross commented that in Australia that it's a huge problem on eBay. And
Oh, absolutely.
so,
Yeah, and they have not taken, eBay has not, from what I've seen, eBay has not taken the same level of care with Australia as they find they have been forced to do with United States stamps. And you can still buy plenty of counterfeits on US stamps on eBay, but yeah, near as I can tell, Australia has done very little with this.
Lewis?
Thank you. Wayne, to put things in perspective, I actually met a casual collector who a few months ago told me that she purchased US stamps at a great discount that she saw on social media. So even someone who has some knowledge of stamp collecting can get fooled by this, which brings up the important point. You just mentioned that eBay has not reacted to this. What about the social media platforms? Can they not moderate and ban these ads? Because there should be some kind of agreement between the USPS and the social media platforms in the US saying we never discount our stamps. Therefore, if there's an ad, it has to be for counterfeit stamps.
Well, and again, that's a very good question and comment. The problem with social media, and less so with eBay, but the problem with social media is they don't care. The money is green, and as long as they can accept money for advertising, they really don't care. And the Postal Service doesn't really have, they don't have a way to enforce this, because to be able to shut down a particular seller on, say, Facebook, they need to be able to absolutely 100% completely prove that this person is knowingly distributing counterfeit stamps. And so with that, they've asked social media, they've asked eBay, they've asked Amazon to partner with them and try to raise awareness and get rid of some of these things. And Amazon and eBay have cooperated to some extent, but Facebook just absolutely does not care. And they will keep accepting it as until whatever. It's a very, unfortunately, greed wins in the end on these.
I actually reported some on Facebook Marketplace. I saw an ad for discount postage and just reported it, as that it was counterfeit or something. And the ad went away. I don't know that it has anything to do with me reporting it, but the ad did go away. So at least it worked on one thing for a moment. But
Well, that's good. And I noticed earlier this afternoon, I don't know if Rob Hennick is in the room tonight or not, but Rob actually reported one to Facebook, and he posted on one of the stamp groups earlier this afternoon that he actually got a response from them, saying they're going to pull this thing down. So the more of us, the more we keep doing, and it's a hassle to do, but I think the more that we keep doing it, the better of a chance that something may actually happen in the end.
Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, Wayne, thank you for a very informative demonstration here. Are there any stamps I'm thinking forever right now, like the Civil War ones that are printed on both sides? They're the self-adhesive, printed on both sides, something like that versus a booklet, which is almost matching front and back, that aren't forged? Or here's the second part of the question, are there any stamps that they haven't forged that you could be confident are not forgeries?
Yeah, thank you. About the only ones that have not been forged are and I just suddenly lost the name of the stamp. Remember the stamp that came out honoring the Japanese veterans of World War II last year? Go, or I keep wanting to say go lightly, that's not it, but the go for broke. Yes, thank you. And that is an engraved stamp, and that's not been counterfeited. Same thing with the dollar value wave stamps. Those, and again, they're not very detailed engravings, but they are engraved stamps, and those have not been counterfeited either. All the two-sided Civil War and other stamps, those have all been counterfeited.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Someone asked, are the tariffs going to affect these large shipments, and why is it that U.S. Customs is not catching them?
This is not an area that I claim to have a lot of expertise in the shipping, but from what I understand, U.S. Customs, although they have the authority to search virtually every shipment that comes through, it's like censorship in World War II. There's so much moving through, you can only basically take a core sample periodically. And so, they're seeing a minor percentage of what actually goes through. And do they catch some occasionally? Yes, but it's a happenstance. They don't examine everything, and they can't examine everything that comes through. Again, as I mentioned, with the elimination of the de minimis shipments, that should help with some of the smaller shipments that come through. But I think the large shipping container type of shipments, because usually they're concealed under other goods. And unless customs actually takes a detailed look and goes through a shipping container, you can hide an awful lot of postage stamps in a very small space.
Someone said, are there any statistics available for successful arrests?
Not really. I mean, every once in a while we'll see a news story, and probably depending on where you live in the country, about 6 weeks ago, there was a bust of counterfeit stamps in the Chicago area, but it was like 175,000, which is a minor drop in the bucket. But they caught them, and they were again, they're by publicizing it, they were hoping to push back a bit on the counterfeiting. But I know of no place to find statistics for larger arrests or overall enforcement of this. I don't know why it's not being kept a secret. It's just nobody's priority, I guess.
So is there a place, other than just the presentation that you just gave us, is there a place where we can look for where these distinguishing characteristics are listed for each of the particular issues? Or is it just in general, look for those things? Like, is there specific on this issue, look for this and this and this? And
well, that's a two-part, and this also gives me an opportunity for one moment of shameless self-promotion.
Do it.
I don't know of any one place that'll give you all the information. There are a couple of websites out there, including one in the Netherlands that focuses on all kinds of different, and I should have put that up in the list here, but focuses on all kinds of different counterfeits and how to tell them apart. But I have, there's a couple of videos that I've done out on YouTube, but most especially, and if you look on the slide that's up right now, I have a Substack page, and Substack is an online publishing network. And I examine virtually all the counterfeits that I get in detail with distinguishing characteristics, and I post on Substack. I write about a lot of other things there as well. You can subscribe for free, or if you wish to pay, you can do that too, but you can subscribe for free. Things do ultimately go into the archive at a point, but there is a full archive of my writing that it includes an awful lot of postal counterfeit writing at this point. But it's out there. You just need to look for it a bit. Again, and I'm sorry I can't provide the Netherlands site. It's a very helpful one too. Of course, you got to rely more on pictures unless you know Dutch, but it is a helpful site.
A question. So what are your thoughts on collecting counterfeits, although that would seem to support those making and selling them?
Well, obviously, oh goodness. Let me go back. So obviously, it's a complex issue. It's a valid study. It always has been a valid study, even though it's taken on huge significance over the last few years. I collect them. I study them. I find them fascinating. Of course, I'm interested in the printing types too, and also I'm trying to raise awareness and keep people informed. But there are a number of people who are seriously collecting the counterfeits, and I don't see that there's anything wrong with that. It's been charged that if you buy counterfeits to collect, that you're supporting these guys, but any number of counterfeits that we as collectors buy, even if all of us who are in the talk tonight decided to go out and start buying and studying counterfeits, it's a minor drop in the bucket. It just isn't. It's not significant. So I think it's a valid study if people are interested in it. It's worth following and studying and finding them where you can. But I wouldn't worry about supporting the counterfeiters, because it's not even a blip on the radar screen of anyone. It's such a small percentage. I don't know if that answers it or not, but it's not an easy question. It bothered me at first when I first started studying them, because I had to buy from the counterfeiters to study these things. But then I realized the sheer quantity, no, it really doesn't make a difference. And it is important for letting others know. And now, as a dealer, I sell counterfeits. I sell them as counterfeits. If somebody wants them mint, I sell them at more than face value, because I don't want them being used as counterfeits. Or I will sell them discounted, but I cancel. I postmark them first. I cancel them. And that way people can afford to get examples of the counterfeits, and I don't have to worry about anybody ever trying to use them.
Good thought. All right, I've got another question here. Is there any known connection between the printer of the counterfeits and the printer of China's postage stamps?
That's a very good question, and I have absolutely no idea. I believe from my contacts, and I haven't asked that question specifically, but from my contacts who are connected with the counterfeiters, there is a printing plant in China that is dedicated specifically to counterfeit stamps, and the same plant that produces counterfeits for the United States is the same one that produces the Australian ones, the German ones, the British ones, the Canadian ones. But I don't think that it's the same. I don't think China Post is producing the counterfeits. Most of what I see coming out of China in their legitimate stamps are, among other things, different printing types than what the counterfeits are.
Alrighty. And then I've got one other question here. Says, so a little bit off topic, but I was wondering about the barcodes. Were the British putting were they putting unique individual numbers on each stamp that were somehow being registered at the first time, and then recognizing copies?
Yeah, and that was the theory behind it, and that by having a unique number for each stamp that went through, the counterfeits wouldn't work. But it was only a matter of a couple of months when they started counterfeiting them, and I don't know if they were using random number. I don't know enough about the coding system. I don't know if they're using random numbers or what, but they started sailing through just like genuine stamps, and so that was an experiment that failed miserably. Of course, you haven't heard anything publicized about that, but hey, they went to a great deal of expense and trouble to do that, and it just didn't work. And again, this is where I think the enforcement, to the extent they're doing it, is by finding the recipient. The best we can hope for right now, I think, is a deterrent. And the other part of this, I mean, the general media in our country, and I think in others as well, just doesn't seem interested in picking up on this. I mean, to me, even all collecting issues aside, this is a huge story. I mean, this is, and most people have absolutely no idea, but I cannot seem to get the general press interested.
All right.
There was a question out here of any China Post stamps been counterfeited, as far as you know.
I missed that one.
I think there would be a very low tolerance within China if they counterfeited their own postage stamps. To the best of my knowledge, there are not, and I think again, it would be like trying to counterfeit United States stamps here in the United States. I think the potential for punishment far outweighs any benefit, and so I would seriously doubt that's been done. And I think that the Chinese officials would look very dimly on counterfeiting their own stamps.
Thank you, Wayne, so much. This was so interesting. Really, really appreciate it.